Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the GSL-English podcast. My name is Gideon, and this is a podcast for all learners of English to practice and improve in a relaxed and natural way. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining me again. Now, in this episode, I want to talk about something which I think perhaps we've all questioned from time to time, and that is, am I interesting? Do you think you are an interesting person? Do you think in conversations and in social settings, you have something interesting to offer? Now, it might just be me, but I think the majority of us have had those moments in life where perhaps we've got something to add in a group setting, in a conversation. We've got a story that we would like to tell. Or we just got something we would want to say, but we have that question in the back of our mind that is, I don't think it's interesting enough. I don't think the way that I'm going to deliver or tell the story is interesting enough. And ultimately, it comes down to that kind of negative thought, which is, why would they be interested in me? Particularly when we're surrounded by people that are absolutely acing conversation. You know, they're the life of the party. Everybody's laughing at their story, everybody's engaged, and you think, well, compared to them, I'm just not interesting. I don't have a lot to offer. Well, I want to battle that kind of thinking today. I want to really, fight against that thought that we're not interesting. We are all interesting, and we all have something interesting to offer. So we're going to read a really interesting article, which is a kind of a collaboration or a collection, that's probably a better word, of different thoughts that I've put together over the last week. Kind of presenting the idea that you are interesting, you've just got to show it. And this is particularly good if you do struggle perhaps with those mental thoughts that, you know, you're not interesting, you should just stay quiet. So I think there's some points in here that are going to help you with that thinking, but also particularly, of course, as English not being the majority of listeners and watchers' native language, how can you be interesting in English? You know, just because you might have an accent, just because you don't consider yourself fluent and aren't going to always use the perfect vocabulary and sentence structure, does that mean people aren't going to be interested? Well, it might well be the opposite. So we're going to dive into that. And also, I'm just going to give some practical tips on how to be more interesting. You know, particularly in conversations, how can we be more interesting? So that's the idea. That's the topic for today. So before we get into it, just a little bit of a catch up. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, guys. There was no episode last week. I'm well aware of that. I am just hold my hands up and I say sorry. There's no particularly grand reason. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't have time and I completely forgot on Friday. I knew that this was the topic that I wanted to talk about last week. I ran out of time on Friday. Then we were staying with friends and family on Saturday and I just didn't get a podcast out. And then, of course, working Monday to Friday. I do this in my spare time. I didn't want to just rush an episode to get out midweek. So I just thought, you know what, we'll just leave a week and hopefully you'll still be here. Hopefully you're loyal enough to come back. So if you're watching this and you are a returning viewer or listener, I doff my hat to your loyalty. Thank you very much. I could have put a post out on YouTube just explaining it, but I didn't. So yeah, I hold my hands up. I apologise for that. I hope you didn't miss me too much. I can't imagine how much you struggled without the GSL-English podcast. I can't imagine how tough it must have been. So I hope you got through that week. I'm only joking, by the way, just in case you think I'm being serious with that. I am only joking. I'm sure you had a fantastic week without the podcast. The success of your week is not dependent on listening to some random ginger British guy talk. Just wanted to put that out there. Sarcasm. There you go. Just a little bit of a life update. I'm a massive coffee drinker. I know, British guy. I should love tea. Never been much of a tea drinker. I like it, but my preference will always be coffee. But recently, I've been craving a cup of tea. Yeah, been a few evenings, a few weekend moments where I thought, you know what? I crave a cup of tea. Got no idea why that is. But yeah, just been craving a cup of tea recently. I don't really know why I'm even telling you that. But it's big for me. I've been drinking coffee for the last 20 years. No, not the last 20 years. That means I started drinking coffee when I was 15. Yeah, no, probably did start drinking coffee when I was 15. I'm getting bored of this story that I'm telling you, so I can't imagine how bored you are. Gonna summarize it. I'm thinking of drinking tea more. Go. Yeah, all right. Bored myself with that one. I hope you're still here. And if you are a new listener and you haven't switched off at this point, just a little introduction. My name is Gideon. I'm an English teacher from London, and I don't teach privately anymore, but I put out these podcasts just to help you absorb and take in the English in a real, natural, and authentic way. So subscribe to just take your English to the next level, to get fluent in one episode. Subscribe. It will happen. Yeah, once again, disclaimer, it won't happen, but I really appreciate a subscribe. So yeah, very good. Give this video a like and introduce yourself in the comments. So let's get into it, but you know what to do before we start getting into the topic. I highly encourage a cup of tea, considering that's my preference now, or a cup of coffee. And if you can, just relax. Just unwind a little bit. Just try and forget about all the stress and anxieties and different things you've got to deal with today or tomorrow, depending on when you listen to this, and just enjoy the English language with me. I'm really quite intrigued by this topic. But yeah, I do encourage you, at this point, just pause the video, get a cup of tea, glass of wine if you fancy it, and just relax. Just enjoy. Okay, so pause, but make sure you come back. All right, here we go. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube or you're watching on Spotify, you can read along with me on the screen, which I do highly recommend. So what we're going to do is I've divided it into sections. We're going to read each section in its entirety because that's what many of you have requested. And there's loads in the past. I've kind of just broken it down after each little paragraph. Many of you have just requested recently that I just read sections in their entirety. So that's what we're going to do. Then we'll go back and break it down. If you guys can see, if you're watching this fly that is going round my head, trust me, it's annoying. There it is. That was like perfect timing. I think that fly is just there for this episode. Honestly, before I started recording, I tried to get the fly out of my office. Didn't happen. But I promise you, it's annoying me more than it is annoying you. So yeah, that fly is going to make quite a bit of an appearance in this episode, it seems. So here we go. You are interesting. Show it. Do you believe that you are interesting? Can you be interesting in a second or third language? Let's see. There is a thought. Sorry, I'm starting reading, by the way. Read along with me. There is a thought that quietly follows many people into conversations and social situations. It says, "You're not interesting. Nobody really wants to hear what you have to say. Don't say anything stupid. Just stay quiet." And the strange thing is that this thought can exist even in people who seem socially confident on the outside. At a party, at work, at dinner with friends. Even while laughing and smiling, many people are privately editing themselves in real time. They stop themselves from telling stories. They cut their opinions short. They almost say something, then decides it's probably is not worth hearing. Over time, this creates a habit of self-erasure. You begin to treat your own thoughts as less valuable than everybody else's. But before going further, it is important to understand something. These are often intrusive thoughts. An intrusive thought is an unwanted thought that suddenly appears in your mind without you consciously choosing it. It can feel automatic, repetitive, and emotionally convincing. In social situations, intrusive thoughts often revolve around rejection, embarrassment, awkwardness, or fear of judgment. For example, everybody thinks I'm boring. Nobody cares what I say. I'm annoying. I should stay quiet. What if I embarrass myself? The important thing is that intrusive thoughts are not necessarily reality. They are mental events. They often sound certain and authoritative, but they are usually driven by insecurity, anxiety, fear, or excessive self-consciousness. Many people mistakenly assume, if I think it, it must be true. But the mind constantly produces thoughts, some helpful, some irrational, some exaggerated, some completely meaningless. Socially confident people are not necessarily people who never experience intrusive thoughts. Very often, they are simply people who do not obey every intrusive thought they have. Because if you constantly listen to the voice saying, "Do not speak, nobody cares," then eventually you stop participating naturally in conversations altogether. And that is unfortunate, because most people are not actually boring. They are simply over-monitoring themselves. They are so busy asking, "Am I interesting enough?" that they never relax enough to become interesting naturally. Because being interesting is not really about performing or impressing people. It is about being engaged, curious, observant, willing to participate, and comfortable enough to share parts of yourself without needing constant approval. At the same time, there is another trap waiting on the opposite side. Some people respond to insecurity by becoming overly performative. They dominate conversations, force stories, constantly try to sound impressive, or treat every interaction like an audition for attention. That usually does not work either. The healthiest social balance sits somewhere in the middle. To believe you have something worth saying, without believing you are the centre of every conversation. That is confidence with humility. And that is one of the most attractive social qualities a person can have. So there we go. There's the introduction there. Now let's just go back to the beginning and break it down. It started off by just kind of talking about these thoughts that many people have in conversations and social situations. I think you might have had this. Perhaps you know where someone's, I don't know, there's a conversation going on and you think, I've got something funny I could say here. Or I've got an anecdote, I've got a story, I've got something to add. In your mind, you're going, well, it's not interesting. Nobody really wants to hear what you got to say. Don't say anything, you're stupid. Just stay quiet. Have you had those thoughts? And it's the thoughts, as it goes on to say, they're the ones that stop us from telling the stories. We cut our opinions short. They kind of just decide for us that, whatever we've got to say is not worth hearing. Now, when we constantly have those thoughts, over time, this creates a habit of self-erasure. And basically, that's saying that what we have to say is less valuable. Our thoughts, our opinions, our additions, our stories, less valuable than everybody else. Why would we say them? So it goes on to talk about the fact that these are what we call intrusive thoughts. Those thoughts inside the mind, they are intruding into our mind. They're not welcome there. They're not invited. We don't want them there, but they're there. An intrusive thought. It's that unwanted thought that appears in your mind when you've not even really thought about it. It's almost like an automatic response. And they're so convincing. I think we all have different intrusive thoughts in different situations, but they're so convincing and we believe that they're real. And they often revolve around four things: rejection, we're going to be rejected; embarrassment, don't talk, you're going to embarrass yourself; thirdly, you're just going to say something that's going to make the situation awkward, no one's going to laugh, or they're going to judge you. But the problem is, we often believe that intrusive thoughts are reality, but they're not. They're just mental events. They're just what our mind has created. what our mind is kind of proposed is going to happen. But the frustrating thing, I think I relate to this. I don't know about you, but those intrusive thoughts, they seem so certain, authoritative, meaning that they've got authority in your mind, a position of almost leadership of what you should think and do. And it's just really frustrating. And everybody, the most confident person in the room could experience intrusive thoughts. But the problem is when we constantly have these intrusive thoughts saying that we're not interesting, no one's going to understand you, they're going to laugh at your accent, you're not fluent, you're going to pronounce a word wrong. What happens is they start to become so habitual that we just stop naturally participating in conversations completely. And this is a really bad thing because most people are not boring. I would say actually everybody is not boring. But we has this great term that we are just over monitoring themselves. There is an element of monitoring that we do. For example, we don't say out loud every thought or opinion that we have. Could you imagine that? But we over monitor it. We're constantly monitoring the fact, am I interesting enough? And the issue is they can't relax enough to become naturally interesting. And that's the link. That actually when we can just relax, when we can be ourselves, that is when we can become the most interesting version of ourselves. That's difficult enough in our own language, let alone our second language. Relaxing enough to allow ourselves to be interesting. And being interesting, I love this point that it goes on to say, it's not about performing. It's not about being the loudest person in the room, demanding everybody's attention. It's about being engaged, involved. It's about being curious, about being observant, but also about, being willing to participate, willing to share something about yourself. And there's others, that they respond to this insecurity, those intrusive thoughts that they're not interesting by being overly performative, demanding attention. And this doesn't work either. So what we need to get is that balance in the middle, that we can be naturally interesting. We can be ourselves. We can let our personality come out without, taking control of situations. We want to have confidence with humility. And that is what makes us interesting. So how do we do it? Well, firstly, we have to realize that we've probably got more to say than we think. Let's read the next paragraph. Many people assume that interesting people live extraordinary lives. They imagine someone constantly traveling, meeting fascinating people, collecting dramatic stories, or having endless charisma. But most memorable conversations are not built on extraordinary achievements. They are built on perspective. One person can tell a story about missing a train and somehow make an entire group laugh. Another person can describe why they love old bookshops, rainy Sundays, or terrible reality television in a way that feels strangely engaging. Why? Because interest often comes from attention, not status. Interesting people tend to notice things, human behaviour, awkward moments, strange habits, funny details, emotional truths, and then they share them honestly. The problem is that many people dismiss their own thoughts before giving others the chance to enjoy them. They think, that's not important, that's random, nobody cares. So they remain cautious and quiet. But conversation is rarely improved by excessive self-censorship. In fact, some of the most enjoyable people to talk to are simply people who trust themselves enough to contribute naturally. You probably have more to say than you think, so let's break this down. So many people assume, or they make the assumption, or they think that To be interesting, you've got to have an extraordinary life. A life where you're constantly traveling, you're meeting amazing people all around the world, you've got dramatic stories to tell, and you've got endless charisma, you've got charm, you've got aura, or you've got that kind of modern word that kind of went everywhere last year. You got riz, you know. But most memorable conversations, they're not based around extraordinary achievements. So when we talk about extraordinary, it's out of the ordinary. It's out of the mundane things that we do on a day-to-day basis. For example, some people they can tell stories really about boring things, but somehow they become interesting. It gives the example, if someone misses a train, they've just missed a train, but you got the whole group laughing. That is not an extraordinary event, is it? That is not, traveling the world. That is not having an amazing encounter. You just missed the train. Quite a boring topic, but you can make it interesting. And I think that's a real comfort for us at this point that, we might think, well, my life is boring. I don't do all these amazing things that people be interested in. You don't need to be interesting. You just got to tell the story correctly. Or, if there's something you love, it gives the example of old bookshops, rainy Sundays, rubbish television. When you talk about something you love, it could be the most mundane thing. It could be the most boring thing. But because we're talking about something that we love, we're talking about it passion from the heart, well, people are engaged in it. Because interest comes from attention, not status, meaning that someone could have met the most famous person in the world. But if they're telling a story in a way that's just not grabbing our attention, or they're telling it in a way that's showy, that's demeaning, that's trying to put them on an elevated pedestal, people aren't interested. They don't have the attention. But interesting people notice things about human behaviour, awkward moments, habits, funny details, emotional truths, and they share them honestly. For example, a story about missing a train. You say, oh yeah, I missed the train. You add bits in like, oh, I missed the train. I was running down the platform and I was slipping everywhere. And then I've realised I got such an awkward run. I was so embarrassed. That's just an example. But you're adding detail to a mundane story to make it interesting. It's your emotional truth. Sharing a story with honesty is what makes it interesting. But you can't do that if you're letting the intrusive thoughts win of, that's not interesting, people are bored. Once we've got that, it's kind of the filter to being natural. So then they remain cautious and quiet and don't talk. Interesting people are interested. This is an interesting point. Just think about that title there. Interesting people are interested. Let's read on. One of the biggest misconceptions about social skill is that it is mainly about speaking well. Actually, socially engaging people are often excellent listeners. They ask questions that create energy. What was that like? How did you get into that? What happened next? What have you been obsessed with recently? People remember those who make them feel genuinely heard. And that is where humility becomes important. A person who constantly tries to sound clever or impressive usually stops listening properly. They wait for opportunities to redirect attention back to themselves. But good conversation is collaborative. The most magnetic people are rarely trying to dominate the room. They are responding to it. They are curious, present, engaged. That combination makes others feel comfortable around them. Now, I think this is a really interesting point. Interesting point of how to be interesting. To be interesting, you've got to be interested in others. It is not just about speaking well, speaking loudly, speaking with perfect vocabulary, grammar, sentence structure, an accent. That is irrelevant. You've got to be socially engaged. It doesn't matter how good your English is. If you want to be interesting, if you want to have good conversations, listen to the best of your ability. Be engaged. If someone's talking to you and telling you a story, ask questions about it. Be interested in the story. How did that make you feel? When was that? How did you end up in that situation? People are interested in others that make them feel heard. You know when you tell a story and someone looks you in the eye and they ask you questions about it, did it make you feel good? Well, you're now interested in that person. You are socially engaged with them. And that's really where humility comes in. Humility is the quality of not thinking too much of ourselves, humbling ourselves enough to realize that we don't have to talk all the time. We can just ask questions and we listen. I love this point where it says good conversation is collaborative. A collaboration is two people working together or a group working together. Conversation is not one way. It's like a game of tennis. It goes back and forth. Conversation is collaborative. The most interesting people are rarely trying to dominate the room. They're responding to it. They're responding to what's happening, what people are saying. They're laughing when others are laughing. They're curious, so they ask questions. They're present, so they listen. They're engaged, so they share. And this is what makes others feel comfortable, and it makes us interesting. We'll keep on reading. There's an important difference between confidence and arrogance. Confidence says, my experience and thoughts have value. Arrogance says, my experiences matter more than yours. Confident people contribute naturally to conversations. They tell stories, share opinions, and express humour without constantly apologising for existing. But they also leave space for others. They understand that social interaction is not a performance where one person wins. Humility does not mean pretending to be small or insignificant. It simply means recognizing that everybody else has an inner world as rich and complicated as your own. That awareness changes how you speak to people. You stop trying to impress constantly. You stop treating conversations like a competition. You become more relaxed and more genuine. Ironically, this usually makes you more interesting. I like this point. To be interesting, you've got to get that balance of course, being confident, and that is saying that what I have to say has value. That's a great thing to have. But we never want to be arrogant, meaning that you have to hear what I've got to say because it matters more than what you've got to say. You contribute naturally to conversations. These confident people share stories, opinions, express humour without apologising after everything. You done that? You told a story, you say sorry. You say a joke, you say sorry. They don't do that. They confidently share what they want to say, but they leave space for others. They understand, that social interaction is not a win situation. It's just recognising that everybody else has got something of value to offer as well as you. And this is really what makes interesting. So if you tell a story confidently, people are engaged, people are interested in it. So you've got to have, or we've got to have that self-worth, that value in what we are going to say. We've got a right to say it. We've got a right to share our stories. Maybe people are interested in it. It's a good story. It's a good joke. It's a good question. But we're not entitled to it. And that's then where arrogance comes in. If we feel that we're entitled to share our story, it's more interesting than us. Everybody must listen. Went into my serious British voice there. It's just getting that balance between confidence but not being arrogant. So here's some tips. Small observations make big conversations. A lot of social connection comes from surprisingly ordinary things. A strange interaction in a supermarket, an awkward moment at work, a terrible cafe experience, a weird habit people have on the tube. Interesting people often collect small observations from daily life because they are paying attention. And attention is socially powerful. Life becomes more conversationally rich when you stop moving, though it distracted all the time. When you stop moving through it, distracted all the time. You begin noticing absurdity, humour, tension, beauty, awkwardness, and personality in everyday situations. That gives you something real to bring into conversations, not rehearsed performances, not forced confidence, just genuine observations about being alive. Now, this is, I think, one of the greatest tips on how to be interesting. Be more observant. A lot of stories, a lot of thoughts, a lot of opinions that we can share often just come from small observations of humanity as the world goes by. And often you'll notice interesting people that they are observant to you. They'll ask you questions about things that you've said that they've noticed. So it's a great little tip there. If we want to feel that we are more interesting, if we want to have something else to offer, be more observant to the absurdity of life. You know, those strange things that just happen. Humour in nature, humour in the way we interact with each other, beauty, awkwardness. You find personality in everyday situations, then we've got something to talk about. Being observant makes us naturally interesting. Genuine conversations about being alive, because that's something that we've all got in common, isn't it? Coming back to that point about humility now. Why humility makes people more likable. Humility creates emotional safety. People generally feel more comfortable around someone who does not constantly need to prove themselves. This is especially true in British culture, where self-awareness and understatement are often valued more than overt self-promotion. Someone who can laugh at themselves tends to feel approachable. A person saying, "I tried cooking and nearly destroyed the kitchen," often feels warmer and more human than somebody endlessly listing achievement. Humility quietly communicates, "You do not need to impress me either." And that allows conversations to relax. People become more honest, more playful, more themselves. And this is where we bring in that element of humility and just relaxing. Don't you feel comfortable around people where they're not always trying to prove themselves? And I think this is particularly true in British culture. Overt self-promotion, so kind of in your face, promoting things you've done, things you've achieved, it doesn't go well. It isn't what makes you interesting. Okay, you might have a cool story about something you've achieved. Great to share that, but the way that we do it and the personality that comes along with it is really what makes us interesting. And when we are humble in social situations, it often lets others know, "Don't worry, you don't need to impress me. You've got nothing to prove. This is a safe space." And isn't that just a lovely environment to create? When we're humble but confident, we just create that environment which is a safe space. You know, this is all good. Just relax. We can have a real conversation together. So we're going to conclude just with some ideas on how to become more interesting socially. So if you do find that you just find it a little bit difficult to know what to say, here's some tips. If you want to become more interesting in conversations and social settings, the answer is usually not to become louder or more dramatic. It is to become more engaged with life itself. Read more. Notice more. Try more things. Ask better questions. Develop opinions. Listen carefully. Share stories without overthinking every sentence. Most importantly, stop assuming that your thoughts automatically matter less than everybody else's. You do not need to become the most fascinating person in the room. You simply need to participate honestly instead of hiding behind self-doubt, because the people we remember most are usually not the ones performing perfectly. They are the ones who feel real. And that's really the point. So let's just break this into two halves. So we'll take that first half there. Just some practical suggestions. If you do want more to say, more to add, Absorb more, read more, be more observant, try new things, a new sport, a new hobby. Kind of develop your own opinions. Listen. There's some great suggestions there. But if we want to be more interesting in conversations, we have to stop assuming that our thoughts don't matter, because they do. And we're not trying to become the most fascinating person in the room. We just want to participate honestly instead of hiding behind those intrusive thoughts. If you have a story to share, share it. If you've got a question to ask it. If you've got a joke to say it. It's not about performing perfectly as humans. We don't know what we're doing. We're not always going to get it right. But what we want others to feel is that we're real, that we're honest. And that is really what makes us interesting. We've all got something to share. We've all got something to say. But we're not trying to perform. We're not trying to be more interesting than others. But don't let those thoughts win. Yeah, just a thought I wanted to share with you. We've all got something to say. So yeah, I do apologise if that fly has been annoying you in this video. It's been driving me mad. I'm going to be honest with you. I was close to stopping at one point and then trying to destroy that fly. It's landed on my head a few times. Been very annoying. But there you go. And just as a little side note, if you do struggle with those intrusive thoughts, I think many of us do. I do a lot of the times with this podcast. Nobody's going to be interested in that topic. Nobody's going to watch it. Blah, blah, blah. You're not alone if you have those intrusive thoughts. I just wanted to say that, but don't let them win. Don't let them take over, and don't let them devalue what you've got to say. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Oh, my throat's gone dry a bit with this one. If you can, give it a like, subscribe, really does help out, and introduce yourself in the comments. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next week. Have a good one, guys.